Varjak Paw by S.F. Said. Chapter 19. Varjak and Holly talked through the night by the giant bronze lions. There was nothing to distract them but the fountain's trickle and the birds trilling. It was strange at first. No one else had ever wanted to talk about hunting before. Varjak could still barely believe that someone his own age was interested in it, and not senseless kitten games like Jay, Jethro, and Jerome. But it was true. Holly was easy to talk to because she was like him. She liked the same things. Her mind worked in the same way. Sometimes it was hard to keep up with her. Whenever he thought he had the answer to something, she asked another difficult question. Why like this? Not like that. And she had ideas he would never have thought up. But he had a few of his own too, and together they worked out their plan. That night, Varjak felt something he never felt before. Or rather, he didn't feel something. He didn't feel alone anymore. They woke Tam just before dawn and explained the plan to her. Her eyes grew round with fear. Me, she said, you want me to do that? Why me? Can you do my part of the plan, said Holly, or Varjak's? Well, no, but you've got to do it, Tam, said Varjak. It's impossible without you. It is, she said. Of course it is, said Holly, and if you do it, I promise I won't say her name anymore. Well then, said Tam cheerfully, what are we waiting for? They took up their positions as the first rays of sunshine splashed onto the white buildings, filling the square with light. Everything began to glow, the ground, the sky, even the water in the fountain. Varjak crept up on the pigeons from one corner of the square. Holly crept up from the other. Tam stood in front of them, on the far side of the flock. At Holly's signal, Tam sprang at the pigeons. 100 birds beat their wings, fierce and dangerous in their flock. Tam kept going, never slowing, just aiming for the other side in a blur of speed they couldn't stop, and Varjak and Holly flew out of the morning sun behind them. It should have been easy. The birds were distracted by Tam and didn't see them coming in the haze of brilliant light. That was the plan. But even as Varjak dived in, the thrill of the hunt in his veins, it started to go wrong. Tam was clear through, but there were still too many pigeons in a mass. He and Holly were on the edge of the flock, but couldn't get close enough to any single bird to strike. The birds turned on Holly, wings flapping savagely, claws curving out. She didn't run. She stood there bravely, trying hard, but now they were surrounding her, pecking at her with shrill, sharp beaks. Holly was in trouble. She was trapped, and she couldn't get out. They were tearing, scratching, ripping at her. Varjak could see panic mounting in her face. Tam was helpless on the other side. Quick. He had to do something. Quick. Slow time. The fourth skill. Everything will seem to slow down around you, but you will be fast. You'll be faster than anything. Would it work in the real world? He breathed. In, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, and the wings slowed down. Varjak could see each beat, each claw, as if in slow motion. He dived after Holly into the mass of birds, moving smoothly through the chaos, making them fly apart for just a moment. Holly, he called. She looked up. It was enough to break the rising terror in her eyes. She darted through the gap he'd made, away from the flock and towards Tam, to safety. Out of danger now, Varjak breathed normally and switched out of slow time. It worked. The fourth skill really worked. Did they hurt you? He panted as he caught up with her. Nothing wrong with me, said Holly, though she was trembling. Thanks for getting me out, she added more quietly. No problem. He saved you, Holly, bubbled Tam. I guess we're even now, she muttered. I didn't do it for that, said Varjak. Holly didn't meet his eyes, but just for a second, Varjak thought he saw a smile flicker on her face. Come on, she said, sliding away from the square. We've got to hurry. I don't want to be here in broad daylight. It's too dangerous. You don't want another go? Said Varjak. He knew she was shaken. Her fur was still ruffled, but maybe it would help to try again. Why bother, she said, padding back through the city. The plan didn't work. It was a stupid idea. No, it wasn't, said Varjak, keeping pace with her, ahead of Tam. And you did everything you could. How about me, said Tam. Did I do all right, Varjak? You were great. You were both really brave. I was great, beamed Tam. There were just too many of them this time, said Varjak. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. Maybe, said Holly, picking up the pace. Maybe if we tried it another way. They started on a new plan as they headed back. The city was beginning to rumble with life once more. Familiar streets flashed past as they went by. I'm still hungry, said Tam. Her nostrils twitched. Wait, you two. It's that fishy smell again. She stopped by a turning off a side street. the same turning where Varjak had caught the mouse. Even in daylight, it curved away into darkness, into shadow. "Come on, Tam," said Holly, over her shoulder. "But it's that lovely smell again," said Tam. "And there wasn't any food in the park, and the hunting didn't work, and I'm still hungry." "We're not stopping here," said Holly. "If you go, you're on your own." She turned back to Varjak and carried on talking. They walked away, planning their next hunt together. Tam stayed behind at the turning. "It's your loss," called Tam. "I'll see you back in our alleys." Chapter 20. Tam didn't return that day. At first, Holly laughed it off. She's probably still stuffing her face. But when Tam didn't show up by nightfall, or the next morning either, she began to look worried. "It was the same street where you caught the mouse, wasn't it?" said Holly. "I had a bad feeling about that place." Varjak thought back to that strange sensation he'd had in the turning. Maybe there was something else out there after all. "You know, I had a bad feeling too." "Let's go and find her," said Holly, as the rain began to fall. They started in the very place where Tam left them. They followed the turning she'd gone down into the shadows, but it just led out into another alleyway. There was no sign of Tam. Nothing. Not even with Varjak's awareness. It was just an ordinary street. They ranged wider across the center of the city, where the street cats who were in either of the gangs lived. None of them had seen Tam. They tried Ginger's territory next, near the concrete blocks where Holly had saved Varjak. They found some cats from Ginger's gang, sheltering from the rain. "I'm looking for Tam," said Holly. "Any of you seen her?" They said they hadn't. "Do you believe them?" asked Varjak, as they headed for the park. "Ginger's gang are rough, but they're honest," said Holly. "If Tam ran into them, if there'd been any trouble, they'd tell us." Tam wasn't in the park either. They searched till twilight. They found a few scraps of food, but not a sign of Tam among the wet, dead leaves. Tired and soaked from the hard rain that fell throughout the day, they headed back to Holly's alleys. On the way, they met a big stripy tom, prowling in a covered, cobbled passage. Varjak recognized him at once by the slash marks on his face. He didn't look friendly. Varjak's dripping fur prickled at the sight of him. But he smiled at Holly, showing a set of sharp, white teeth. "Razor," said Holly. "Holly," nodded the stripy tom. "Good to see you. Where's that shaggy cat you're always with?" "Tam. I don't know where she is. Have you seen her?" Razor shook his head. "No, but she hasn't been near Sally Bones' territory. I'm sure of that." "How do you know?" "It's my job." He licked his paws proudly. "Who's this you've got with you?" He flicked his tail in Varjak's direction, but didn't look at him, as if he wasn't worth wasting time over. "I'm Varjak Paw," said Varjak. The tom's tail twitched with contempt. "I wasn't talking to you," he said. Varjak fell silent. "Nothing to worry about," said Holly quickly. "He's one of us. Just a pet who got lost." Razor sniffed. "Why waste your time with a pet? Come and join our gang. You know Sally Bones will win in the end. This is her city." Holly smiled but didn't say anything. "You'll be safe from the Vanishings," said Razor. "Sally looks after her own." "Thank you, Razor," said Holly. "But you know I've never wanted to be in a gang, and I've got to look for Tam now." She began to move away. Razor stepped in front of her, muscles rippling. "Come on, Holly," he said. "I've always liked you." Holly was still smiling, but Varjak could see her trying to edge away. "You could be somebody, in a gang," said Razor, moving closer, following her. "You could be important. I could make you important." "I don't want—" "Come on," insisted Razor. "I'll take you to meet the boss. I'm one of her top cats now." There was a flash of fear in Holly's mustard eyes. Varjak saw it. "She told you she doesn't want to," he said, without thinking. Razor turned to him. The scars on his face writhed like snakes. "I warned you already," he growled. A rock-hard paw smashed into Varjak's face. Varjak reeled, stunned, and sank to the ground in a pool of rain. He wanted to get up, to fight back, but his legs were soggy paper and the world was spinning around him. "Don't get in my way again," snarled Razor. His words twirled above Varjak's head like stars. One hit, that was all it took, and he didn't even see it coming. The brawny tom turned back to Holly. "When you've had enough of wasting your time with weak little losers, and you want to see what it's like being a real cat, come and find me." He padded away, tail held high. "Varjak," said Holly when he was gone, "are you all right?" Varjak shook his head. Blood trickled out of his mouth. He wiped it away with the back of his paw. It matted on his fur. "It was brave, standing up to him," she said. "But it was stupid. You can't win a fight with Razor." "I'll beat him one day," said Varjak. "You're crazy," she sighed. "You've got to learn to use your brain. There's no point in fighting cats like that. The best you can do is just keep out of their way." I'll beat him, Varjak vowed. Whoever had left those scars on Razor's face had managed it. He could do it too. You're not going to beat anyone today, Mr. Paw, said Holly. Come on, let's keep looking for Tam. Chapter 21. Varjak's wounds healed as the moon grew bigger in the sky. He slept most days in Holly's alleys or hunted and foraged for food with her. By night, they searched the city for Tam. He was worried about her, but he liked learning about hidden ways and secret paths no one else knew. Together, he and Holly walked the city walls, its window ledges, its shadowy back streets. They always kept clear of people, though they often could hear them close by. They stayed away from the wide main roads, and they never approached or even mentioned those shrieking, roaring metal monsters that prowled up and down them. Everywhere they went, they asked about Tam. No one had seen her. Neither Varjak nor Holly said the word aloud, but it was beginning to look like Tam had vanished. Now, said Holly, there's one part of the city we haven't searched yet, and it's time we did. Sally Bones' territory? It's dangerous, but we've got to try it. Varjak didn't say anything. He didn't think they'd find Tam there. They were nowhere near it the last time they saw her, and he didn't want to run into Razor again so soon. But he was curious about the tales of Sally Bones, the cat who was white and could appear out of thin air. Holly led the way through the streets, out of their familiar ground and into parts of the city Varjak hadn't been in before, though he'd glimpsed them from the hill long ago. The streets became bigger the further they went. So did the buildings. One of them was almost high as a hill, and its outline sparkled with lights. It had a glass front, windows instead of walls. Each showed something different inside. Varjak peered into a window. There were animals in there, ranged out and displayed on glass shelves. Little furry mice, fluffy rabbits, colorful birds. Their eyes were open, but they were silent and still. It was as if they were stuck in the moment, frozen in time, forever about to move, but never quite making it. Stop staring, Mr. Paw, said Holly. Never seen a toy shop before? What are they? The toys? They're nothing. Children play with them. She moved off down the pavement. Come on, we can't hang about on Sally Bones' territory. Varjak tore his eyes away from the frozen scene and followed her, but he was getting the strangest feeling. It was like in an alley before the mouse hunt, a cold sensation, being watched by something not quite alive, not quite dead. He let his awareness flow out again, and found the source. It was coming from a stack of boxes by the toy shop door. One box had fallen on its side and split open. The flap hung loose and limp. I am very well, thank you, please, said a tinny little voice from inside the box. It rustled, and out came a cat. Varjak's first thought was that it looked like Tam, or a cruel joke about Tam. It had a shaggy chocolate-brown fur and comfortable look, but everything else was horribly wrong. Like the animals in the window, it didn't seem real. Its eyes were wide open, but they were glassy, expressionless. It was smiling, but the smile was weirdly empty. It talked, but back to front nonsense. Tam, said Varjak. Tam? Happy, 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 said the cat. Varjak's fur stood on end. It's Tam, he cried. Look, Holly, what's happened to her? Don't be stupid, said Holly. It's a toy. She peered closer at the cat. Its head nodded, bobbing up and down cheerfully. It's a good one, realistic. Look at the detail. The fur's perfect. But it's Tam's fur. Tam's fur was never so neat, Holly sniffed it. Doesn't smell like a cat, does it? And listen to it. That's not how any cat talks. I be your friend forever, said the toy in its strange, hollow voice. Oh, Holly, it's horrible. I'm sure it's Tam. Holly wheeled about and faced him, mustard eyes on fire. Of course it's not Tam, she yelled. Get it through your head. Tam's gone, see? She's vanished. There was a moment of silence. Even the toy cat seemed to be hanging on her words. There, I said it. She's vanished. She was a greedy idiot, and now she's vanished. Another fine friend who's left me. She's not coming back. Ever. Understand? Varjak had never seen her so upset. He knew Holly missed her friend, of course, but she was so spiky and cool, she'd never shown it before. Are we going to keep looking for her? He said softly. Here's your pretty kitty cat, said the toy. Holly closed her eyes. No, she's not here. She's not anywhere. She's vanished. She shook her head. I'm sorry I shouted at you. It's just, that's not Tam. Varjak peered again at the toy cat. She was right. Tam had vanished, but this wasn't her. It looked like her, but that was all. It wasn't even alive. Wasn't even dead. A cat which was not quite a cat, and behind it there were more just the same, shuffling around in the broken box. I am very well, thank you, please. they said. He shivered. I don't like them, he said. Why would anyone want one of those when they could have a real cat? People like toy cats better than real cats, said Holly. No looking after them. They do what you want. They're always nice and cute. Not like us. She grinned. Not like you, anyway. You couldn't get a toy cat to stink if you tried. He had to smile. Come on, she said. Let's get out of here before we run into Sally Bones. Let's go home. Varjak's mind whirled as they sped back through the city. He didn't like those toy cats, not one bit. But then he remembered that toy mouse back in the Contessa's house, how real it had seemed, and how much he wanted to play with it. The Contessa's house. He hadn't thought about it often, with all that was happening, but the idea brought pictures to his mind. An empty armchair, an antique fireplace, a row of china bowls. The pictures were hard to hold on to. They kept changing into other pictures. The harder he tried to hold on to them, the harder it became. Even the garden that night, the gentleman's lips, the way his cats moved, it was all fading. At that moment, Varjak felt he would give anything to be with his family again. Away in the distance, he heard the muffled roar of a metal monster. A great wave of sadness washed up from his stomach. Let's stop here, Mr. Paw, said Holly suddenly, snapping him out of his thoughts. She pointed at a covered alley. We're still on Sally's turf, but it's more dangerous to walk through her streets now than to sleep here for the day. She smiled at him. He tried to smile back. He couldn't. Hey, what's wrong? She said. I want to go home. I told you it's safer to stay here. Not that home, my old home on the hill. Still thinking about that? She shrugged. What's stopping you? I can't. I was supposed to go back with the dog to save my family from the gentleman and his cats. I tried to get one, Holly. I stood there, in front of those monsters, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't even get them to talk. He closed his eyes, the shame still stinging like a new cut wound. I failed. It's not your fault, she said gently. Dogs are scary. Stupid, too. I've never heard of a cat who could talk to them. Varjak sighed. Jalal could do it. He knew that. But he was no Jalal. He wasn't even a proper Mesopotamian Blue. All I know is that I've let everyone down, and I can never, ever go back. Without a dog, I don't have a home anymore. That's not true. The whole world's your home now. Even Sally Bones' territory. She winked a mustard eye at him. Let's get some sleep. It'll seem better tomorrow. You never know what's around the corner. They settled down, side by side, in the shadows of the alley. There was no invisible barrier between them anymore. There hadn't been for quite a while. Chapter 22. Varjak dreamed. He dreamed he was walking by the Tigris. Zigzag palms swayed in the cinnamon breeze. The sky was vivid with stars. Jalal walked beside him, shimmering in slow time. Varjak breathed. In, 2, 3, 4, and slowed himself down until he felt the energy pulsing inside him. Only then could he clearly see how Jalal was moving. It was different to anything he'd ever imagined. All cats are graceful, but Jalal was a river of energy like the Tigris, flowing and changing itself at will. Your body, said Jalal, is but a part of you. You are more than your body. You can make it do anything, if you know how. You can dodge any blow. You can strike any enemy. You can win any fight. I will show you how, for that is the 5th skill, and we call it moving circles. His silver blue frame started to twist into shapes as strange as those stars above. First, he made a soft velvet arch of himself. Varjak copied him. He stretched his spine as far as it would go, and then a little bit further. Next, Jalal's arch curved around on itself, became a fluid figure 8. Varjak followed him, made the move. It was a giant stretch. He felt pain, hot white pain, but he felt something else as well. The energy that pushed into his belly was changing into a new kind of power. And now Jalal's figure 8 melted into a circle, an endless moving circle. Varjak breathed in deeply and followed his ancestor. His whole body shook under the strain, but that power was building up, growing stronger. A warm flow, free and unlimited. A moving circle, like Jalal. It felt like he was glowing. Good, said Jalal. Now the last movement. Open the circle. Let loose the energy. Take it outwards. Use your momentum to direct the force, like this. Jalal's paw appeared out of nowhere, a whisker from Varjak's nose. He hadn't seen it coming at all. His eyes widened. If he could master this skill, he could beat anyone. Strike me, said the old cat. Varjak breathed, moved, opened his circle. Jalal arched aside, a moment too late. Varjak skimmed the fur on his shoulder. A surprised smile appeared on Jalal's face. "Well," he said, "you have traveled far since first we met, Varjak Paw. But remember, you take enough and no more. No matter how tempting, you may cause harm only when your life is in danger." His eyes sparkled amber like sunrise. "Which it is. Now wake up." Chapter 23. Varjak woke from his dream in the alley. It was nighttime again. He and Holly had slept through the day. A streetlight buzzed on and off behind him. A full moon, round and white as a saucer of milk, shone comfortably up above, but it was quickly smothered by street-black clouds. He needed to go to the litter tray. Holly was fast asleep, and they were still on Sally Bones' territory. Well, it was all outside, wasn't it? The whole world was his litter tray. He could go wherever he pleased. He slouched out of the shadows and did his business by a heap of rubbish. What a relief it was. His awareness tingled. The fur on the back of his neck prickled. He felt like he was being watched. He swiveled to face the top of the alley and immediately wished he hadn't. A thin white cat sat there. She was licking her claws, watching him with one ice-blue eye. Where the other eye should have been was an empty socket. Her fur was spotless clean, but around her was a smell of darkness, of dank and deadly things in places. By her side prowled a dozen street cats, thick-necked and bristling, grimy as the city itself. They were bigger than the white cat, but somehow they looked like soft little kittens beside her. "Good, was it, Sonny?" she asked. Varjak couldn't answer. He kept staring at her, unable to speak. She was all muscle and bone. He could see her ribs. They jutted out as if they were trying to escape from her. "Now this isn't your territory," she said, flexing her bone-white claws, "and you shouldn't ever do what you've just done all over someone else's territory, especially if that someone is me." She smiled a crooked smile, but her single eye stayed cold and hard. He had no doubt who he was looking at. No wonder poor Tam was terrified of Sally Bones. "Speak when the boss talks to you," growled a stripy Tom with slash marks all over his face. Varjak recognized him. Razor. Holly stood up beside Varjak. "He didn't mean it," she said. "He's new here." Her legs quivered, but her voice was steady. "New, is he?" said the thin white cat. Her tail swished angrily. She nodded at the stripy Tom. "Razor, why wasn't I told about this?" The Tom began to shake. "I didn't think it was important, boss. He's just a pet." The air seemed to shimmer for a moment, and then Razor howled and clutched his face. There was a fresh, new slash mark across one side, and the white cat's claws were tipped with blood. "It's not your job to think, Razor," she hissed. "It's your job to tell me everything. And if you can't do your job, I'll find someone else who can. Understand?" Razor nodded, still clutching his face. In that moment of quiet, Varjak could hear his own heart thumping in his throat. "Now get some information out of this new cat," spat Sally Bones. "I have a feeling he's something to do with the Vanishings. Luger and Wes, you two watch his little friend." Razor and the other two cats came towards Varjak and Holly. Holly's ears twitched nervously. "Why couldn't you wait till we got home?" she whispered. "We've had it now." "We could make it over those walls," said Varjak, searching for a way out. "They'd only catch us. At least Razor's doing it, not her." Holly shivered. "Just don't tell him about my alleys, okay?" Razor marched up to them, his eyes slitted, claws glinting. The slash on his face was red and raw. "What's your name, troublemaker?" he snarled. "Varjak Paw. Where are you from?" "Mesopotamia." Razor's scarred face twisted into a scowl. "Very funny. Where are you really from? Where do you sleep?" Varjak glanced at Holly. What could he do? Anything he said could give her secret away. He could only keep it by staying silent. "Are you going to open up?" said Razor, his mouth curled back, baring his teeth. "Or do I have to open you up?" There was no sound at all in the alley except the street light's buzz. Varjak kept his mouth shut. They all stared at him. Razor, Sally Bones, her gang, all staring at him. Varjak felt boxed in and alone. The pressure mounted in his head, but he stared straight back at Razor without a word. He was determined not to look away. "Well?" demanded Razor. The Tom's eyes burned into him, but Varjak hung on. "Don't look away. Don't let him win. Hang on. Hang on. Hang on." Somewhere in the distance, a monster roared. Razor blinked and looked away. Varjak relaxed, and in that instant, something slashed his cheek. Razor's claws. Varjak reeled back, stunned. His head was on fire. "I'm going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget," growled Razor. He came forward. Varjak lashed out. The street cat dodged easily and jabbed his jaw in return. Blood sprayed from Varjak's face in a thick red fountain. Another hit to the face. Varjak's legs felt weak. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Harley start to move, but Luger and West moved faster, blocking her off. It was just him and Razor. "Not so tough, are you?" spat Razor. "I can finish you any time. I'm going easy on you. Now talk." He slammed Varjak's ribs, knocking him off balance. Varjak staggered into the rubbish heap. It squelched around him. He was still standing, but he couldn't take another hit. Moving circles, the fifth skill. You can dodge any blow. You can strike any enemy. It was his only chance. Varjak breathed as Razor came up for the kill. In, 2, 3, 4. Energy pulsed into Varjak's belly. Out, 2, 3, 4. Time slowed down. In, 2, 3, 4. Razor struck in slow motion. Out, 2, 3, 4. Varjak made a moving circle. In, 2, 3, 4. Razor missed. Out, 2, 3, 4. This is good, thought Varjak Paw. He could see the others staring at him. Holly's mouth hung open in surprise. Razor bared his teeth, came in again, moving as if through mud. Varjak opened his circle, let loose the energy. It hit Razor with everything he had, right between the eyes. Chapter 24. Razor's head jerked back. Varjak had struck his target. But the big tom was strong. It was only enough to daze him. He stepped out of Varjak's reach and shook his head, as if he couldn't believe he'd been hit. "Enough," Sally Bones shouted. Varjak looked to the top of the alley, but she wasn't there. "Where did you learn that?" her voice demanded from behind him. He wheeled about. There was the faintest shimmer of white, but she was gone again. "Who taught you?" she hissed from somewhere inside his head. And before Varjak knew what was happening, she had him pinned flat on the ground, white bones above him, single blue eye burning into him. He lost the rhythm of his breath, and everything sped up again. He was out of slow time. "Answer me," she said. "Who taught you?" He couldn't move. He couldn't hide. "Jalal," he cried helplessly. Sally Bones's one eye glittered like the moon. "Jalal," she said. "Jalal the Paw? He's been dead 100 years. What could you know of Jalal? What do you know?" "Slow time," gasped Varjak. "Moving circles." "You?" Sally Bones blinked. Something that might have been fear flashed across her face. "Is it you?" Before Varjak could answer, a long, low growl filled the air. Everyone turned to face it. At the top of the alley, blocking the way out, was a new kind of monster. It was black and bristly, almost as big as a man. Its mouth was full of pointed yellow teeth, which dripped with drool. It barked loudly and took a step toward the cats. Terror ripped through Sally Bones's gang. Razor, Luger, Wes, they all bolted. They scrambled up the fire escapes and over the walls, away from the monster, away from the alley. "Come back," she screamed. "Cowards. We can beat it if we fight together." But they weren't listening. Her gang scurried to safety as fast as they could. The thin white cat shook her head with contempt. She stood up reluctantly, letting Varjak go free. "We'll finish this another time, Varjak Paw," she said. There was a shimmer of white, and she was gone. In a single heartbeat, Varjak and Holly were alone with the monster. It looked confused. It barked at the walls, but didn't try to follow the cats up. "So those Sally Bones' stories are true," breathed Holly. She shook her head. "I don't know what was going on back there, but I swear you had them worried." Varjak's head was whirling. Sally Bones knew about Jalal. She knew about the way, much more than he did. She wasn't even scared of this monster. "Thanks for keeping quiet about the alleys," said Holly. "Come on, let's get out of here, before it gets us," she urged. The monster began to lumber towards them. Its big blunt claws clacked on the pavement as it came. It was incredibly powerful. Even its tail looked as if it could knock them senseless. Varjak focused. What would Jalal do? Second skill, awareness. He looked into its eyes. They were cloudy black. There was pain in those eyes, and there was fear, almost terror, in its scent. It barked again, a deafening sound. Varjak didn't flinch. He just kept looking into its eyes. If he hadn't once stood before a roaring dog, he would have run away. But compared to those metal monsters, this frightened, barking animal was friendly. "What are you doing?" hissed Sally. "Let's go." Varjak looked up. He could probably make it over a wall or onto a window ledge, like Sally Bones' gang. He gambled instead and trusted his instincts. This time, he wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to panic. He was going to stand his ground and face it down. "Don't be afraid," he said to the monster, in the calmest voice he could manage. It opened its jaws. They were big enough to swallow him whole. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. And then it sprang at him. Slow time, and Holly leaped for cover. Moving circles, but Varjak stood his ground. Shadow walking? Wrong. The monster smashed into him, the world turned upside down, and everything went black again. Chapter 25. "There are times when it is useful to disappear," said Jalal. Varjak was back in Mesopotamia, where the air smelled like cinnamon and tasted of ripe dates. He smiled. It was good to be back. Whatever happened in the real world, there was always Mesopotamia in his dreams. Jalal stood beside him in the shadow of a wall, and then he was gone. "Jalal?" said Varjak. His ancestor had disappeared. Even his scent had gone. "Jalal the Paw, that I am," said the old cat's voice. But all Varjak could see was a shadow at the base of the wall. Varjak shook his head. "That's impossible." Jalal appeared again, right next to Varjak. "Nothing is impossible." "Maybe it's possible for you, but I'm not you, Jalal. I can't do these things. I can't go invisible or talk to dogs." "Believe something is impossible," said his ancestor calmly, "and you will surely fail. But believe in yourself, and you can do anything." Varjak thought about the pigeon hunting with Holly. She believed it was impossible, but he felt sure they could do it if they could just find the right way. Maybe this was the same. And here was Jalal himself offering to show him the way. Wasn't it worth trying and trying and trying again? He nodded. "Teach me, Jalal." "Shadow walking is the sixth skill," explained the old cat. "To shadow walk, you must let go of yourself, like when you stalk your prey and you become your prey. But instead, here you become nothing, nothing at all. You join with the shadow. You become one with the air and part of the ground. You let go. Try it." Varjak slunk towards the wall, willing himself to disappear. "I am a shadow," he told himself. "No one can see me. I'm invisible." "You're thinking too hard," said Jalal. "Shadow walking is not done by thinking. Shadows cannot think, after all. Think about nothing. Empty your mind of thoughts." Varjak tried to think about nothing, but found himself thinking about nothing. He tried to empty his mind, but his mind was full of images of emptiness. "Now you are trying too hard," said Jalal. "Perhaps it is too soon. You must know yourself, be sure of yourself, before you can let go of yourself. Do you know who you are?" Varjak frowned. "What do you mean?" "Think about it, Varjak Paw." Jalal disappeared into the shadows. "Think hard, for your life depends upon it." Chapter 26. Varjak awoke. He was sprawled on the ground in the alley. His shoulder screamed of pain. Holly was gone. The barking monster towered above him, its foul breath in his face. Its big red tongue lolled out, glistening hungrily. It looked like it was getting ready to eat him. He was wrong to trust his instincts. This creature was worse than a dog. It was the most terrifying monster in the world. He had to do something. Shadow walking, the sixth skill. Think about nothing. Empty your mind of thoughts. Varjak concentrated. Nothing, nothing, nothing. But it wasn't that easy. The pain in his shoulder filled his mind. He couldn't do it. He couldn't shadow walk. Varjak looked up desperately at the narrow brick walls of the alley. It felt as if they were closing in on him. If he could only get to the ledge. He tried to stand up, but it hurt too much. There was no escape now. It was all over. The monster's drooling mouth opened wide. "Kludge," it said in a deep, deep voice. Varjak stared, helpless. It blinked those cloudy eyes. Then it licked itself once. "Kludge," it repeated. Varjak scratched his ears, not quite sure what he was hearing. "Is that your name?" he said. "Kludge?" It panted. A shy smile appeared at the corner of its mouth. "Kludge," it affirmed. Varjak smiled back. Maybe Kludge wasn't going to eat him after all. "Varjak," he said. "I'm Varjak." "Varjak? Varjak. Varjak. That's right, Kludge. I'm Varjak. Varjak, Varjak, Varjak," barked Kludge. "You've got it." "Varjak." Varjak gingerly shifted his weight onto his front paws. His shoulder twinged, though not as badly as before, and he flopped back onto the ground. Kludge reached down to lick the wounded shoulder. His big black eyes were cloudy with worry. "Sorry, Varjak," he sighed. "Didn't mean to hurt." "That's okay. I should have run like the other cats." Kludge was scared. Varjak not scared? No, he smiled. He was beginning to like this great big creature. Kludge looked fierce, but he seemed gentle inside. "Kludge alone," he sniffed. "Everyone run from Kludge. No friends." Varjak looked into Kludge's eyes again. He could see it all there. He recognized it. His pain, his fear, his loneliness. "It's all right, Kludge," he said quietly. "You're not alone. We'll be friends, you and me." "Friends?" panted Kludge. "Varjak, Kludge, friends?" Varjak grinned. "Friends," he said. He tried to stand up again. This time his shoulder took the weight. "Friends," barked Kludge. He wagged his tail. "Varjak, Kludge, friends, friends, friends." "Varjak Paw," said a gravelly voice. "This is a first. I've seen a lot of things in this city. I've even seen you hit Razor. But this is truly something else." Holly jumped down from the wall. "You did it. You talked to a dog." She shook her head. "It's incredible. It's unbelievable. It's—" "A dog?" said Varjak. Kludge barked. "Yes, a dog," said Holly, keeping a safe distance from Kludge. "What did you think it is?" "But he's not like the other dogs." "What other dogs?" "You know, the metal ones." Holly looked baffled. "I've never seen a dog like that." In the distance, a monster shrieked and roared. "Those ones," said Varjak. "The dogs that make that noise." Holly shook her head. "That's not a dog, that's a car." "A what?" "Car," barked Kludge. "Cars are fun. Kludge chased cars." "So they weren't dogs?" said Varjak. "Let me get this straight," said Holly. "All the time you thought you were talking to dogs, what you were really doing was talking to cars?" Varjak frowned. He was confused. The metal monsters were dogs. He was sure they were. But had anyone else ever called them dogs? No. Now he thought about it. He'd never known for certain what they were. He just assumed they were dogs, because they fitted the Elder Paw's description from the tales. They filled his heart with fear, they had foul breath and a deafening sound, and they looked strong enough to kill a man. But he had to admit, so did Kludge. Awareness, the second skill. Before you do anything, you must know what you are dealing with. Assume nothing. Be sure of the facts. That was exactly what he'd failed to do. He'd almost killed himself trying to talk to a car. A beginner's mistake. Not the kind of mistake a cat who knew the way would make. He wouldn't make it now, and he was sure Sally Bones wouldn't either. Holly giggled. "What's so funny?" Varjak demanded. She pulled herself together, but only just. "You," she said. "Cars aren't even alive, you moron. You can't talk to a car." "You didn't think I could talk to Kludge either," reasoned Varjak. "Kludge only talked to friends," said the big dog. "See," said Varjak. "Maybe cars only talk to their friends too." Holly couldn't control herself any longer. Her whiskers started to twitch. Her body began to shake. And then she cracked up completely. Laughter streamed out of her and flew around the alley like a flock of birds. It was everywhere. It was contagious. Kludge rolled about on the ground, yelping and panting helplessly. Then Varjak found himself laughing too. He couldn't help it. He had to join in with them. It was a good feeling, light and free. He saw it all now, how he'd got it wrong. Of course cars weren't dogs. Kludge was a dog. Kludge was a dog? Varjak stopped laughing. Kludge was a dog. With a dog he could save his family from the gentleman and his cats. If only there was time. "Kludge, I need your help. I need you to scare a man. Can you do that?" Kludge stopped yelping and became very serious. He drew himself up to his full height and bared his yellow teeth. Holly's laughter tailed away at the sight. "Kludge scare everyone," the great dog said in his deep voice. "Except Varjak." "Then let's go. There's no time to waste." Varjak turned to Holly. "Coming?" "Where?" "Up the hill. The three of us. We're going to save my family." "This is mad," said Holly. "But no one messes with Sally Bones and gets away with it. We're not safe in this city anymore." She stood up. "So all right, Mr. Paw. Lead the way. Where you go, I go." Something in Varjak soared at that moment. "Thank you," he said. "My friends." Chapter 27. The three friends headed for the hill at top speed. Varjak explained about the gentleman and his black cats on the way. He hoped he wasn't too late. With the elder Paw gone and father in charge, what would the family do when they faced the gentleman's cats? What would the gentleman's cats do to them? Anything could have happened. After all the time he'd been away, the house would surely be different. Those pictures in his head, the red velvet armchair, the china feeding bowls, might not even exist anymore. He was sure of only one thing. They'd have to climb the wall to get in, and Varjak remembered it as the hardest climb of his life. Thunder growled above the city as they reached the foot of the hill. The sky was violet with the threat of another storm. "It's up here," said Varjak, leading the way as lightning flashed overhead. They climbed the hill as fast as they could. Rain began to fall. It came in stinging whips, which lashed into Varjak's nose, his eyes, his ears. He tried to snatch a breath. Water filled his mouth, surged down his throat. He choked on it, but kept going, up the hill. 1 step, 2 steps, 100, 1,000, whatever it took. The moon stared down at them, a sullen one-eyed sentry in the sky. Give up, it seemed to say. Give up and go away. Soaking, straining, panting for breath, they reached the top of the hill as the sky shattered in white light. What Varjak saw there made his fur prickle. A little stone wall stood before them, half the height of any in the city. It looked old and crumbling, as if it had been neglected for a very long time. Another blast of thunder rocked the earth. Varjak shivered. Could this really be the same wall which enclosed the world he grew up in? The wall that once seemed so high and impossible to climb? Was this the place he had left? Or had everything changed while he was away? There was a door in the wall. He pushed at it. It wouldn't budge. It was locked. He circled the wall, seeking some familiar sight. A lightning flash revealed the cracks and fissures in the stone where the wild moss grew. At the top of the wall he could see the gnarled upper branches of some stunted old trees. And there was that single tree which he'd fallen down the night he left home. Varjak touched its wet bark and smiled with relief. He recognized it now. Of course it was the same. The place would never change. It was him who had changed. "This is it," he shouted happily above the thunder. "There are trees inside. We can climb down. I'll go first and—" "Kludge, what's wrong?" Kludge was shaking. His eyes were cloudy with fear again. Can't climb," he stammered. "Kludge can't climb." Varjak stared at the huge, powerful dog in disbelief. "You can't?" "Of course he can't," snapped Holly. "Everyone knows dogs can't climb. We'd be in big trouble if they could. Isn't there another way in?" "Dogs can't climb?" "No, they can't," said Holly. She frowned. "This is the only way in, isn't it? I can tell from your face." It felt like falling through the air and never landing. They were so near, but that wall, that old stone wall, stood in the way once again. "Kludge, sorry," said a small, scared voice beside him. "Want to help, Varjak." Lightning flared up above. Thunder cracked. Rain streamed down Varjak's face like tears. But it was strange. The storm didn't scare him as it had before. Instead, it seemed to enter him from whiskers to tail, filling him with its own wild power, so that he, in the storm, became one. There was no turning back now. With or without a dog, he was going to find his family. "It's all right, Kludge," he said. "You wait for us here. Come on, Holly, let's go inside." They left Kludge cowering under the tree. The 2 cats stormed to the top of the wall. They clambered over the edge and down the other side, through a tangled maze of twisted branches. Silently, they stole into the garden. They padded over the wet grass and up to the cat door. "This is it," whispered Varjak as they slipped through. "This is the Contessa's house." Chapter 28. They emerged in the corridor. It was empty. The cat door clicked shut behind them. Holly turned to it at once, nudged it with a paw. It stayed shut. "Let me try," said Varjak. He pushed, but it wouldn't open. It had locked from the inside. "So you can come into this place," said Holly, "but you can't leave?" "The gentleman must have changed it," said Varjak, a knot of tension growing in his stomach. This wasn't a good sign. He looked around the corridor. The thick green windows were closed, the lace curtains drawn. It looked normal, except that, like the garden wall, everything seemed much smaller and older than he remembered. The faded rugs, the stuffy furniture, compared to the city, it was more like a display in a shop window than any real place. The silence made it stranger still. There were none of the city sounds here. There was no one about either. Not the family, not the gentleman, not those black cats of his. Yet it smelled strongly of cats, as if there were lots of them, very near. His whiskers tingled. This wasn't right. Where were they all? Varjak and Holly shook the rainwater from their fur and moved stealthily along to the hallway. At the top of the stairs, above the musty carpet, the Contessa's door was closed. Varjak pricked up his ears. He could hear something up there, a long, low, mewing noise, but further down the corridor he thought he could hear cats talking. "I'll look upstairs," whispered Holly. "You check down here. In case I find them, what do your family look like?" Varjak paused. "A bit like me," he said, "but different. Be careful. Run if you see a man, or two black cats. They're dangerous." Holly headed up the stairs. Varjak edged along the corridor. He tried to empty his mind of thoughts, as Jalal had said, so he could shadow walk. But it was no good. The thoughts kept coming. Where were the family? Were they all right? Would they be glad to see him, or had they forgotten about him already? He could clearly hear voices now, coming from the front room. The door was half open. He crept up to the edge where he wouldn't be seen and peered in. There they were, the Mesopotamian Blues, alive and well. Relief flooded through him. He wasn't too late. He hadn't let them down. There was no sign that they'd been hurt, no sign of the gentleman or his cats. It looked like a family council was in progress, but it was Julius who sat now on the Contessa's red velvet armchair. The others were clustered around him, fiddling with their collars as they listened to him speak. What was going on? "I don't care," Julius was saying. "But things like this don't happen for no reason," said Father. "Shouldn't we try to find out what it means?" "I'm the head of this family now," said Julius, flexing his muscles. "Does anyone have a problem with that?" There were a few mutters around the room, but no one replied. Varjak couldn't believe his eyes. Things really had changed since he'd been away. Julius was acting like a gang boss. It looked like he'd done to Father what Father had done to the elder Paw. "If we all agree," said Julius, "then the council is over." Varjak took a deep breath and stepped into the room. They turned to stare at him as if he was a stranger. "Varjak," said Mother, "is it really you, sweetheart? Look, everyone, he's back." At once they cleared a space for him, surrounded him with silver blue fur and green eyes. "Varjak Paw, we thought you were lost forever. He's grown, hasn't he? Welcome home, Varjak." Home. Finally, he was home. He looked around the family circle. They were purring and beaming at him. Mother, Father, and Aunt Junie, Julius and Jasmine, Jay, Jethro, and Jerome. They all seemed so glad to see him. It was good to be back. "Where have you been, son?" said Father. "Outside." "And the elder Paw?" Varjak shook his head sadly. "Gone." Julius stepped between Varjak and his parents. "Things have changed since you've disappeared," he said. "I'm head of the family now. Father was for a while, but now it's me." He stuck his chest out to underline the point. He was bigger than Varjak remembered him. He'd grown taller. His body had thickened and become more powerful. His collar was tight around his neck. He looked extremely well-fed. Varjak glanced at Father. He seemed tired and old next to Julius. It was obvious who would win in a fight. Perhaps it had already happened. "Congratulations," said Varjak to his big brother. "That's not all that's changed," began Father. "No, things are better for us now than they've ever been," interrupted Julius. He pressed something down beneath his paw. It was the toy mouse. "The gentleman's been very good to us." "Him?" said Varjak. "His cats killed the elder Paw." There was a gasp around the room, but Julius just looked annoyed. "You're lying," he said, raking his claws across the mouse. It had become ragged. Its fur was wearing. "The gentleman loves us. His cats are our friends. Why would they do a thing like that?" "They wanted to stop us going outside." "Well, there's your answer," said Julius. "They were only trying to help. If you hadn't been doing something wrong." Varjak bristled. It was Julius who was wrong. Varjak knew he was. But Julius could always make his lie so convincing, and Varjak couldn't find an answer fast enough. Now, said Mother. "Julius is right, Varjak. The gentleman still feeds us wonderful food every day. As for his cats—" Julius shot her a look, and she coughed. "Well, that's enough of that," she said quickly. "But just look at you, sweetheart. Haven't you grown? And those scars on your face. You've changed so much I hardly recognize you." "What scars?" said Varjak, and he remembered Ginger and Razor and Sally Bones. He smiled. The world outside had left its mark on him. "Well, I've had a few fights." A voice like milk in the morning purred in his ear. "Cousin Jasmine." "Why, Varjak, you're not a little kitten anymore." Varjak's ears perked up. He'd always liked Jasmine more than the others. "He'll always be our kitten," said Mother. She licked Varjak's coat, smoothed his fur. He didn't object. He let her warm tongue wash away the rain from the storm and the city's grime, let her strip him of the smell of outside. "That's right," said Julius, glowering at Jasmine. He's still a kitten. "So what's it like outside?" said Jay. "What happened to your collar?" said Jethro. "And how'd you get those scars?" said Jerome. "I'll tell you," said Varjak, though Julius was now glowering at them. "I'll tell you everything." Chapter 29. Varjak didn't tell the family about his dreams. He didn't think they'd understand that part, but he told them all about the city, the fights, the friends, the vanishings. It felt strange to tell his tale at last. It didn't feel real. It was more like a dream or a fantasy. The Mesopotamian Blues, young and old, gazed at him, listening silently, captivated by his descriptions of life outside the house. By the time he got to Kludge, even Julius seemed enthralled. "Varjak's brought glory to the family," said father, when it was over. Varjak did his best to look humble, but it wasn't easy. "I always said he'd turn out well if we brought him upright," beamed mother. Jasmine purred at him. Jay, Jethro, and Jerome looked at him with new respect. But Julius just snorted. "That's a good tale," he said, toying with a gentleman's mouse. "Except it's only a tale, isn't it? I know you, Varjak Paw. I bet you were so scared you didn't do half those things." Julius's pupils narrowed. He puffed his fur out, making him look even bigger than he was. Varjak's throat tightened. A fight was the last thing he wanted at this moment of triumph. He looked into the fireplace. It was cold. "Yes, sometimes I was scared," he admitted, "but everything I said was true." "You scrawny little insect," sneered Julius. "Who do you think you are, coming back here and lording it up like this? You think we care about your stupid tales?" "Julius," cooed Jasmine, in her milky voice, "I do believe you're jealous." Julius ignored her. "He's not even a proper Mesopotamian Blue," he hissed. "Never has been, never will be." He flicked the toy mouse aside and stared at Varjak with green eyes full of contempt. "That's not true, Julius," said father. "Of course Varjak's a Mesopotamian Blue. Only a Blue could do those things." "He's not one of us," growled Julius, eyes the color of danger. "Isn't that right, insect?" Something rose in Varjak's heart. His mind was catching fire. All those times Julius had made fun of him, made him miserable, made him feel small and weak. "Don't call me that," he said. "Insect," spat Julius. "I don't like it. I never liked it. It's what you are. Now come on, I'll squish you flat." Something snapped inside Varjak. "All right," he heard himself yell. "Don't, Varjak," said Jasmine. "He'll kill you." Julius hissed at her. She shrank back and was silent like the rest. Varjak's face was burning. He had no choice now. He had to go through with it. Varjak and Julius started to circle each other, stalking around the Contessa's empty armchair. The family made a ring around them. Everyone was watching, silent, with bated breath. Varjak breathed, 1, 2, 3, 4, and dropped smoothly into slow time. Julius glared at him with scornful green eyes and bared his teeth. Varjak glared right back, bared his own teeth. Julius looked surprised. "Come on, Julius Paw," said Varjak. "Squash me flat." Julius lunged in. He was quick for a cat of his size, but Varjak was quicker, more agile, a moving circle of pure energy. He stepped aside. Julius bit heavily into space. His teeth cracked together. It sounded painful. "Don't ever call me an insect again," said Varjak. Julius roared. He raked out with a strong, silver-blue paw. Varjak was too fast once more. Julius missed and lurched into the armchair. Jay, Jethro, and Jerome giggled. Were they laughing at his moving circle? Varjak turned to see them giggling at Julius instead. He smiled, but as he looked away, Julius came at him and cracked the side of his face with vicious strength. Varjak staggered back. He hadn't expected that. It hurt. "Insect!" thundered Julius. "Now you've made me angry." He launched a flurry of claws. Senses reeling, Varjak dived away just in time. He had to keep breathing, keep the moving circle going, or Julius would finish him. He dodged the furious attacks that followed, becoming a shimmer that Julius couldn't quite hit. The attacks grew wilder, angrier. Varjak stayed a step ahead, just out of reach, as his big brother closed in, until Julius threw everything he had at him in one massive blow. There was no avoiding this one. Varjak had to meet it, head on. He breathed out 2, 3, 4, went deep into his circle. The power rose within him, and when Julius came, the circle held true. Varjak turned the blow away using his brother's own strength against him. Julius went stumbling to the ground. Varjak grinned. It felt good. Better than the time he'd fought Razor. It was better than anything, a hot, intoxicating glow that pulsed through every fiber of his being. He'd never felt so alive. Julius was off balance now, weak and exposed. Finish him, thought Varjak. Right now. Let loose the energy. He'll never fight again. Do it. No. Enough, said Varjak Paw. Enough and no more. Julius shook his head. I'm only just beginning, he panted. Insect. Julius flung himself through the air, out of control, claws splayed. Varjak leaned away in slow time. Julius smashed headfirst into the fireplace, looked at Varjak with small green eyes clouded by black ash, tried to stand up. Couldn't. It was over. Varjak Paw, cried Jasmine. Varjak Paw, the whole family hailed his conquest. Varjak Paw, Varjak Paw, Varjak Paw. He closed his eyes. The victory tasted sweet, like cinnamon. He'd done it at last. He was a Mesopotamian Blue. Varjak Paw, is that you? A gravelly voice. Varjak's heart skipped a beat. Holly? Varjak? I'm here. Chapter 30. It was Holly. Her spiky black and white fur burst into the front room. Varjak went to the door to meet her, flushed with victory. But there was a look in her mustard eyes, a look of horror, that wiped the smile off his face the moment he saw it. Varjak, it's horrible, she said. We've got to get out of here. She looked up at the thick green windows, searching for a way out. What's horrible? Said Varjak, confused. It's the Vanishings. This is where they've all gone, she shuddered. The man's not here, and I didn't see those black cats. But there's a room upstairs with a big cage in it, and hundreds of cats in it. Only lots of them aren't. She closed her eyes as if she was trying to block out the memory. Aren't what? He said, afraid of the answer. They're not alive. She looked more shaken than he'd ever seen her in the city. Sorry to interrupt you, Varjak, said Mother, but who was this? The Mesopotamian Blues were all watching, even Julius, licking his wounds by the fireplace. Holly, this is my family, said Varjak. Mother, father, everyone, meet Holly. Don't worry, Holly said to them. We'll find a way out. Father frowned and turned to Varjak. I don't understand, he said. Do you know this cat? This is Holly, my friend from outside, who I told you about. Father looked disgusted. He turned his back on her. They all turned their backs. This is not outside, said Father. Tell this cat to leave us. It felt like a slap in the face. Varjak glanced at Holly. She looked as stunned as he felt. How could you even think of it, whispered Mother. You should know better than this, sweetheart. Didn't you hear? Protested Varjak. She's going to help us get out. But we don't want to get out, said Mother. Where would we go? Who would feed us? Wait a minute, said Holly. Have you seen what's happening upstairs? If you're being fed, it's not for a good reason. Father ignored her. He spoke just to Varjak. We haven't been upstairs because of the black cats, but we know there are other cats up there too. You do? Said Varjak. The gentleman brings them to the house, said Father. He feeds them. Not like he feeds us, not with caviar, but cheap, dry food. There are sacks of it in the kitchen. He keeps them alive until, well, we don't know exactly what happens next, but we all agree that the gentleman would never harm one of us. You're wrong, said Holly. If it's them today, it'll be you tomorrow. We're different, Father said to Varjak. We're special. We're Mesopotamian Blues. As for those common cats, he shrugged. Who cares what he does with them? They're nothing. What? Said Holly, ears and whiskers bristling. Less than nothing, said Aunt Junie, as if Holly wasn't there. Come on, Varjak, let's go, said Holly. These idiots deserve everything they've got coming. Her words made Varjak shiver. He didn't know what to do or say. He looked at Mother. We know what we're talking about, sweetheart, she said in a gentle, reasonable voice. We're not going anywhere. His head was spinning. Maybe they were right and Holly was wrong. The gentleman hadn't harmed them yet. Perhaps he never would. But what about Holly? Said Varjak. She is not one of us, insisted Father. Varjak looked at Holly. He looked at his family. There was a twisting, tearing feeling in his guts. He looked at Holly, the family. and Holly again. His insides were being ripped in half. It was impossible. "We need you here," said Jasmine. "You need me?" said Varjak. Father nodded, very serious. "Of course we need you, son. You're head of the family now. You can't just leave us." "You beat Julius," said Jay. "Julius was terrible," said Jethro. "But you're the best, Varjak," said Jerome. Varjak felt proud inside, proud to be a Blue. It was the front door opening. The gentleman entering the house. 2 sleek black cats by his shoes. "Come on," urged Holly. "Now!" She cut towards the corridor. Varjak couldn't move. His mouth felt numb, like ice. He wanted to go with her, but how could he? He finally had what he always wanted. He was a proper Mesopotamian Blue at last. He couldn't ruin it. He couldn't walk away now. Holly stopped on the edge of the front room. She glanced back at him. He looked away. Shame pricked his eyes, made him blind. He couldn't meet her mustard gaze. "Holly?" "Varjak, what's wrong?" I can't." He felt it at once, her invisible barrier going up, coming between them. And he knew why. Because he'd done exactly what she'd always feared her friends would do. He let her down, at the very moment when she was trying to help. But what else could he do? "I'm the worst friend in the world," he whispered. "Stop," she said. "Don't say another word." Varjak watched, frozen to the spot, as Holly bolted like she'd been burned, bolted away from him and towards the front door. The gentleman's cats were ready for her. In a blur of blackness, moving as one, they blocked her and flung her to the floor. Varjak's awareness sprung into action, taking in their smooth, sleek power, their deadly speed. He'd seen everything in the city, even the fearsome Sally Bones. But these black cats were still something else. The way they moved together so perfectly, their identical eyes. They were more like machines than anything alive. They had Holly trapped on the ground. His heart screamed at the sight, but how could he fight them both on his own? They'd destroy him, like they destroyed the elder Paw. He turned to the family for help, but they turned away. No one could look at him. The gentleman closed the front door. He stooped down to touch one of the black cat's collars and whispered something in its ear. It left Holly with the other black cat and marched up to the front room, where it stood, blocking the way out. It stared at Varjak and the family with its black eyes. As its gaze fell on him, Varjak's awareness quickened with a strange, cold sensation. He took a step towards the black cat. Immediately, it pushed him back. Varjak's hackles rose. "Don't, son," said Father. "You're bringing us into danger." "Just let them do what they want," said Mother, "and they won't hurt us." Varjak's mind was raging. After all they'd been through together, he'd let Holly down. He'd brought her here. He'd cost her few moments in which she might have escaped. And now, he couldn't even help her, because that would harm his family. And there was no way he could do that. He wanted to be a Blue. He was a Blue. He belonged with them. Not her. Them. He looked on, powerless, as the other black cat dragged Holly up the stairs. She went without a struggle. There was no fight left in her. Varjak watched, silent, unable to move. The last thing he saw was the tip of her tail, vanishing from view. It was like watching his own heart being torn out. She was gone. The gentleman went upstairs after her. The black cat who'd been guarding them followed at last, leaving Varjak alone with the family again. "That's my son," said Father. "I knew you'd do the right thing," said Mother. "What an ugly little cat she was," said Cousin Jasmine. Her voice sounded like milk. Sour milk. Chapter 31. That evening, Varjak dreamed. He dreamed he was walking by the Tigris. Date palms swayed in the cinnamon breeze. He looked up at those Mesopotamian stars, no longer so strange. They were part of him now, as he was a part of this place. It was peaceful out here. It was home. However hard Jalal's teaching was, it wasn't as difficult as the real world, with its decisions and dangers and failures. Jalal walked beside him. "The knowledge that was lost is almost restored," he said. "There is but one more skill. This, however, I cannot teach you. I can only tell you its name." As he spoke, Varjak wondered what the original Mesopotamian Blue really thought of him. Jalal had never answered that question. Would the old cat be proud that Varjak had stood by his family? He'd faced a terrible choice, and he had chosen the Mesopotamian Blues. It hurt inside when he thought of Holly, so he tried not to, and looked at the silver blue ancestor instead. What is the seventh skill, Jalal? The seventh skill is to trust yourself. There, your training is now complete. Keep the way alive, Varjak Paw. Jalal glided down to the water's edge. Wait, called Varjak. I don't understand. Show me what it means. Trusting yourself is a skill, like open mind, said Jalal. But where the first skill looks outward, this seventh looks inward. This is the hardest skill of all. For someone who thinks he is not worthy even to be himself, it could be impossible. Varjak hung his head, tried to look away from Jalal's amber gaze, but there was no avoiding his ancestor's words. They seemed to reach right into his heart. What have I taught you, my son? A cat must be free, must be true to itself. When you said you were not worthy to be a Mesopotamian Blue, I knew not whether to laugh or cry. You see, who you are and where you come from count for nothing with me. The only thing that counts is what you do. Varjak gasped at his ancestor. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Aren't we the noblest of cats? He said. We are whatever we choose to be, said Jalal. If being a blue means anything, it means following my way. Any cat who does this is one of mine. All you need to do is trust yourself, and I say you are worthy to be a blue. He smiled. What say you now, Varjak Paw? But my eyes. What color are your eyes? They're the wrong color, the color of danger. Which is? Varjak hesitated. I don't know, he admitted. I've never seen them. Come and join me, my son. Varjak glided down to the water's edge. Look at me, said Jalal. Am I worthy to be a Mesopotamian Blue? Of course you are. Now look into the river, said Jalal. What do you see? Varjak peered at the still surface of the Tigris. He saw the stars shimmering deep inside. He saw the moon rising in the east. And he saw two silver blue cats with amber eyes, calmly looking back at him. Chapter 32. Varjak awoke from his dream in the front room. It was still dark outside as he looked around. The family were gathered around him in a circle by the Contessa's empty armchair. His mind was like the sky after a storm. Everything was clear and sharp. He knew what he had to do. With one leap, he sprang onto the red velvet armchair. No one tried to stop him. Not father, not Julius. It was his. The power was his, and only he could decide what to do with it. Now, he said, I need the truth. Has anyone seen the Contessa since the gentleman came to the house? They shook their heads. So unless we do something ourselves, we're at his mercy. How often is he here? He goes out a lot, said father. And the black cats, do they go with him? Varjak, you're head of the family, said Julius. I'm not disputing that. But why do you ask these questions? It's only going to cause trouble. Why can't you just accept things as they are? Because something's happening up there, something bad. I'm going to find out what it is. I'm going to get my friend back. And if I have to, I'm going to fight those black cats to do it. Whatever's going on up there, said Mother, it doesn't affect us, sweetheart. We're different. Varjak shook his head. We're not different. We're not special. We're cats, just the same as the others. They looked at him as if he'd gone mad. Didn't you hear what Holly said? She's right. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day soon. The gentleman's coming for us, too. His cats killed the elder paw to stop us leaving. He's got something planned for us. I know he has. A murmur went around. They were thinking about it, but they weren't convinced yet. Even if you're right, said father, how can we fight those black cats? They're too strong. The elder paw fought them, said Varjak. They beat him, but he gave them a fight first. A good fight. If we work together, we can do it. That's what I believe. Who's coming with me? He looked around the family circle. Mother, father, and Aunt Junie looked away. Julius and Jasmine looked away. Jay, Jethro, and Jerome looked away. Varjak Paw was on his own again. All right, he said. If you change your minds, you know where to find me. He came down off the chair and marched out of the circle, out of the room, into the corridor. No one came with him. He didn't expect them to. It was all right, like being in the city again. He had nothing to rely on but himself, and the skills Jalal had taught him, nothing else. He slunk to the foot of the stairs. Holly was up there somewhere, and so were the gentleman's cats. How was he going to get past them? He needed to be invisible. He was going to have to shadow walk, the only skill he couldn't master. He took a deep breath. This time it had to work. There was no other way. He remembered his dreams. You must know yourself. Be sure of yourself before you can let go of yourself. Do you know who you are? Yes, I do, he thought. I'm Varjak Paw, nothing less and nothing more. He relaxed, let go, and merged with the shadows at the foot of the stairs. The world flickered faintly around him. One of the gentleman's cats came out of the contessa's room. It stood at the top of the stairs, surveying the scene with its black eyes. Would it see him? It turned his way for a moment, but looked right through him. Varjak placed a paw on the first step. The black cat didn't react. It was as if he didn't exist. Slyly, slowly, slithering low, Varjak shadow walked the stairs. The gentleman's cat just sat there, unaware. It couldn't see him. No one could. He was invisible. He could go anywhere. But where was he going? What was he going to see? He remembered Holly's face as she came into the front room. Whatever it was that lay ahead, it wasn't good. At the top of the stairs, he heard mewling. It made his fur prickle. It was the sound of fear, but he had to face it. However awful, he had to learn the truth about the gentleman, the vanishings, in the contessa's room. That was the only way he could save Holly. His awareness tingling with danger, Varjak crept past the gentleman's cats and up to the room. Sticking to the shadows so he couldn't be seen, he looked in. It was just as Holly had said. There was a cage in there. It had a solid metal door and sharp wire mesh. It was full of cats, street cats with no collars. But they weren't tough or menacing. The air was thick with the scent of their fright. Varjak could taste it, bitter on his tongue. They were cowering from the gentleman as he reached into the cage, cowering from the black cat that prowled by his shoes. Varjak craned his head right back and saw the gentleman pluck out a tortoiseshell cat from the cage. She was mewing pitifully. So were the cats around her. The gentleman closed the cage door and locked it up with a lever. Varjak had to hold himself still as the shiny black shoes clicked past, a whisker away. The gentleman was carrying the tortoiseshell out of the room, dangling her by the scruff of the neck. The black cat stayed behind, standing guard over the others. It took all Varjak's control to remain there in the shadows. The urge to flee clawed at his chest. The cage, the cats, the smell. It was a nightmare. But he had to trust himself, be true to himself. Downstairs he had known that it was right to come up here, and it was still right. There could be nothing worse for a free cat than to be locked up in a cage like this. Even if it never affected the Blues, this was more important than family, more important than anything. He had to find a way to release Holly and the others. But where was she? He looked into the cage again, and finally glimpsed her in a corner. Holly was all right. Varjak could see that she was talking to someone, a thin, frightened-looking chocolate-brown cat. Was it possible? Varjak looked closer. His heart skipped a beat. It was Tam. There she was, scared, but still alive, after all this time. So Holly was right about the vanishings. This was where they ended up. But why? Where's he taking the tortoiseshell? Holly was asking Tam. What's he going to do with her? Tam shook her head. We don't know, but that's the end of her. Once he picks you, it's over, she shuddered. It doesn't take long, said another cat. In the shadows, Varjak's scalp prickled. What didn't take long? What was going on here, and why was his mouth so dry? Can't we get out of this cage? He heard Holly ask. Think we haven't tried, said Tam. It only opens from the outside. And even if you could open it, how are you going to get past them? Those black cats are the ones who got us in the first place. Varjak felt cold. It was that strange sensation again, being watched by something not quite alive, not quite dead. He felt it downstairs when he met a black cat's eyes. What did it mean? It couldn't be coming from the black cat this time, because it wasn't looking at him. Throat tightening, only just holding back the fear, Varjak followed his awareness, and now he saw where the sensation was coming from. It wasn't one gaze he felt, but many. There were other cats in the room, heaped up in a box. They didn't move, didn't talk, didn't breathe. He looked into their eyes. They were wide open, but they didn't blink. They weren't eyes at all. They were shiny colored glass with a black slash through the middle. Varjak's head began to spin. What was it Holly had said? They're not alive. No, they were just like the toys in the city, but turned off. The gentleman came back into the room. He was carrying the tortoiseshell cat, but it wasn't quite the same anymore. It had become totally still. It didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink its glassy eyes. It had a new collar tied around its neck. The gentleman touched the collar, and as it opened its mouth to speak, Varjak knew with awful, sickening certainty what words it would say. "I am very well, thank you, please," said the tortoiseshell in a hollow little voice. Its smiling head nodded up and down, until the gentleman touched its collar again, and it was still once more. It was a toy cat now, like the others, a perfect, preserved, furry toy that seemed almost alive because it once was. So were the rest of them, every last one, not quite alive, not quite dead, not cats anymore, but toys. Varjak wanted to scream. This was wrong. He'd never seen anything so wrong. The gentleman placed the tortoiseshell carefully in the box and rifled through it, counting up his toys. Varjak turned his eyes away from the sight, and the cats in the cage began to howl. Chapter 33. The gentleman's shoes clicked past Varjak as he flicked off the light and headed downstairs. The black cat went with him. Fury, pure, white-hot fury, seared through Varjak's body, surged through his muscles, scorched away his fear. There was nothing in his mind but what the gentleman had done to these cats. It had to be stopped now, while he still had the advantage of surprise. There was not a second to waste. He came out of the shadows into the Contessa's room. The howling stopped at once. Everyone in the cage looked at him, 100 cat's eyes glowing in the dark. How to set them free. He'd seen the gentleman pull a lever to lock the cage. There it was, halfway up. One more climb for Varjak Paw. The wire mesh cut into his pads as he scrambled up, but at least it had grips, more than the garden wall. Varjak hooked both paws around the lever. He pulled down with all his weight, and the lever clicked. The metal door swung open. Cats began to stream out. They were pushing and shoving, fighting each other to get away first. No one was listening. They were running in a panic out of the darkness of the Contessa's room. Varjak leaped down off the cage. It was chaos on the ground. Paws and claws and tails like snakes writhed as 100 cats fought for freedom. This wasn't going according to plan. Where were Tam and Holly? They could help him, if Holly would forgive him. A howl of pain came from somewhere outside the room. Varjak clambered over the paws and claws out of the door, onto the landing, into the light. The black cats were at the top of the stairs, both of them. Together, they were terrifying. No one could get past them. Strewn aside them were the bodies of those from the cage who'd made it out first. They'd been swatted aside mercilessly and were either out cold or dead. Varjak couldn't tell. The others were trying desperately to get back into the Contessa's room, where they thought they'd be safe. It was carnage, but in the middle of it all, Varjak felt strangely calm. There was no way back for him. This wasn't going to be like fighting Julius or even Razor. This was something else. It was life or death. That simple. Like a dancer, he picked his way through the chaos of cats. They made space for him. A profound silence settled on top of the stairs. Varjak looked at the two black cats and started to breathe deeply, filling his lungs. He was getting stronger and better every time. The power was growing within him, like a living thing, and he could feel it again, rising up now. This was what he was born to do. This was it. This was the moment he'd been waiting for all his life. Fourth skill, slow time. He sucked in the air, slowed himself down. Fifth skill, moving circles. Varjak came at the gentleman's cats, powerful as a pulsing breath. Sixth skill, shadow walking. Varjak flickered out of sight. The black cat's whiskers twitched, as if they knew something was about to happen, but they didn't know what. Varjak's moving circle lifted him up, flying, an arc of vengeance aimed at the enemy, for the elder paw, for Holly and Tam, for every cat who'd vanished off the streets. The power rose in Varjak's paws. Claws slid out, white knives of fury, and slashed the gentleman's cats. Varjak was out of the shadows now. All the energy, all the darkness and light was flowing through him, going out in blow after blow after blow. Everyone who'd ever put him down, every time he'd walked away, all his anger and his pain went into that attack. It felt overwhelming, a massive rush of power, almost more than he could control. He could win this fight. He could beat anyone, because he knew the skills. He kept the way alive. Inside him, everything Jalal had passed on was coming together, and around him, he could hear the street cats, no longer mewling in fear, but cheering as he lashed onto their enemy. It couldn't be long before they joined in, and then the battle would be theirs. He had one of the black cats backed against the wall. Varjak looked into its eyes. Even now, they showed no expression. He launched another circle, ripping right across its face. It didn't blink. No blood came out of the wound. Varjak was tearing it apart, but it didn't bleed. How could that be? He hit it with his best shots, shots he knew would knock out any normal cat, but it stayed standing. It didn't go down, and now he'd lost the element of surprise. The black cat hit back. It was incredibly fast, even with Varjak in slow time. He arched aside and only just dodged. The two black cats glanced at each other, and then they came for him, as they'd come for the elder paw in the garden long ago. Two bodies moving perfectly, one on each side. Varjak spun a circle as wide as he could imagine. Moving quick as thought, he deflected one blow, then another, turning them away. The circle held. He could feel the energy crackling through him, but the black cats kept coming, relentless, tireless, perfect. Two of them. They didn't give him a moment to think. Never an opening, never a chance. It took all his power, all his concentration to fend them off, and slowly they forced him back towards the Contessa's room. One of the black cats broke through his circle. His defenses were down. He reeled off balance. It leaped on him, wrestled him to the ground. Varjak twisted away, but it was no good. His enemy had him now. It was beating him into the floor. Hard to breathe. Where were the others? Why weren't they helping? Must break free. Varjak lashed out. The weight pressed down on him, pitting his paws, crushing his lungs. Varjak gagged. No air. Black eyes filled his sight. He'd used all the skills, and they weren't enough. The way wasn't enough. But there had to be a way to win. There had to. At the edge of his vision, he saw a flash of black and white fur. A gravelly voice. The collars. The collars? Varjak looked at the black cat's neck. It wore a collar like the toy cat's. He looked into its eyes. So strange. Not like cat's eyes. Glassy. Glass. They were glass, like the toys. Not quite alive. Not quite dead. If the gentleman could make a toy cat, why not a fighting cat? A perfect machine. Couldn't be killed. Didn't bleed. Never gave up. Could be turned on or off. From the collar. Last chance. He sucked in the air, sucked it all in, and let it out in one last blast. A desperate lunge for the throat. His teeth closed around the collar, wrenched back, and ripped right through it. The collar curled off the black cat's neck. Its eyes opened wide in surprise. It started to raise a paw, but it was slowing, and slowly, almost gracefully, it ground down to a stop. Chapter 34. There was silence at the top of the stairs. The gentleman's cat was finished. Its body lay stiff and crumpled on the floor. It wasn't terrifying anymore. It looked like what it was, a broken toy. Varjak stood up, shaking, exhausted. He couldn't believe he'd done it. With all his skills, he was no match for the black cats. He'd fought the fight of his life, yet the truth was they were better than real cats in almost every way. But they could never be alive like a real cat. That was their strength. It was also their weakness. Somehow, he'd made it count. The other black cat was staring at the broken toy, as if it couldn't believe what had happened either. It nudged the crumpled body. There was no response, no movement, no life. It stood up, very slowly, and came towards Varjak. He knew what was coming. This one would never let him near its collar. It was going to avenge its twin. It was going to destroy him. And for all the world, he couldn't think how to stand against it. But it stopped just before it reached him, and looked him in the eyes. For the first time, Varjak thought he saw a flicker of expression there. It looked sad. Terribly, terribly sad. It wasn't fighting anymore. No, it was holding its neck out. It could beat him. It could beat anyone. But it was holding its neck out, as if it wanted him to cut its collar too. Varjak hesitated. After all this time, fearing and hating the black cats, he'd never thought they might have feelings of their own. but the two of them had always been like one. And now, without its other half, even the perfect fighting machine was useless. Varjak thought he understood. He leaned towards the black cat. It didn't move away, didn't resist. Very gently, he cut its collar. Its eyes widened for an instant. And then it, too, ground to a stop. It was over. He's done it. He's beaten them. Everyone was shouting now. We're free. Where was Holly? At that moment, she was all he could think of. Where was she? She'd figured out how to stop the cats. She was the one who'd done it. Kind of sad, those black cats, said a gravelly voice behind him. One couldn't work without the other. Varjak turned to face her, his heart aching. Would she forgive him? Holly, I'm sorry. I should have come with you. Her mustard eyes were smiling. I know, but you made up for it. Because you're not the worst friend in the world, Mr. Paw. Not by a long shot. They grinned at each other. Varjak, you did it, said Tam. She was breathless, and her eyes were shining. I told her you'd do it. Didn't I tell you, Holly? Tam, he said, it's good to see you again. Cheers were going up. Some of the cats from the cage were starting to head downstairs. Wait, shouted Holly. Her gravelly voice stilled them instantly. It's not over yet, she warned. We have to find a way out. The house is all locked, all the windows, all the doors. So we've got to find another way. We're going down, but quietly. No one does anything unless we tell you. We're not bossing you around. We just know what's going on here. Understand? There was a ripple of agreement. Varjak marveled at the way she took control. He smiled to himself as they led the cats down the stairs in a stealthy, silent column. He had his friends back, both of them. They'd beaten the black cats. They'd done the impossible. After all he'd been through, maybe, just maybe, everything was going to come good at last. Varjak, Varjak, help! He looked down. It was Julius howling. Julius in the gentleman's grip. The gentleman waiting for them at the foot of the stairs. The column of cats froze in fear. Varjak could see his family on the edge of the front room, trembling, powerless. They were all powerless before the gentleman. The black cats were gone, but they were nothing compared to the man who made them. The gentleman dropped Julius and stepped towards the stairs, shouting in a voice like thunder. The column of cats cracked and began to break. Wait, cried Holly, but no one was listening now. The street cats panicked, turned tail, fled upstairs. Julius scurried back to his family. In the space of a heartbeat, Varjak, Holly, and Tam stood alone as the gentleman came for them. His shadow stretched out before him. It covered the stairs, draping them in darkness even before he reached them. His shoes shone like black ice. As they clicked closer, step by step, Varjak could see his own reflection, looming larger in their blackness. How could he let himself believe that everything would work out? He should have known better. He hated himself for having that moment of hope, because now the hope was gone. There was nothing left at all. There's no way out, is there, Varjak? Said Tam. No. Looks like goodbye, said Holly. We go down fighting? We go down fighting, said Varjak Paw. The gentleman's waxy white hand reached out for him, huge enough to hold his whole body, strong enough to break his neck. Varjak bared his teeth, ready to bite, to fight to the death, and it would be death. How else could it end? The hand closed around his neck and... The smash of breaking glass, a roar like the sky ripping open. Leave my friends alone, and the hand let go. Varjak looked up to see the biggest, blackest monster in the world. Kludge. It was Kludge. The great dog had come through. He'd shattered the windows of the Contessa's house. Kludge was ferocious. Even Varjak shook at the sight of him. Kludge roared. The gentleman cowered. He backed away from the stairs, hands in the air, shaking with terror. It was something Varjak never expected to see. This almighty man, so vast, so powerful. He'd made the toy cats, the black cats. He was responsible for the Vanishings. He could do anything, and yet even he, with all his power, had something he was scared of, something he couldn't face. And faced with Kludge, the gentleman became like a little boy, lost and frightened and all alone. Kludge circled around him, growling and snarling and snapping his teeth. He forced the gentleman over to the broken green window, and then he came at him with big, blunt claws. The gentleman screamed. He turned and ran out of the window, out of the house. With a wink at the cats, Kludge leaped after him and chased him screaming into the night. Chapter 35. The gentleman was gone. A great cheer went up. The cats from the cage came charging downstairs. Varjak Paw slumped to the floor. He should have felt like cheering too, but he didn't. All he wanted was a quiet place to rest. Some chance. Varjak Paw, you did it, said Julius. Varjak and his friends. They were swamped by admiring green eyes. The Mesopotamian Blue swept them up and carried them on their shoulders. Around them, the street cats were taking over the Contessa's house. They were everywhere, celebrating their release, enjoying their freedom. Thank Jalal that's over, said Mother, above the racket. Now how are we going to get back to normal? Good thing there's all that dry food, said Father. It's not caviar, but it'll do. Varjak stared at them, shocked. You don't want to stay here after everything that's happened? We can't go outside, said Father. This is our home, said Jasmine, the Contessa's house. But there's no Contessa anymore, said Varjak. No more gentlemen. It's just us. We're on our own in the world. He heard a snuffling noise. It was Jay, Jethro, and Jerome. Don't be scared, he said. We'll start again. We'll find a new home somewhere, just like Jalal when he left Mesopotamia. Except this time it'll be ours, because we'll make it ourselves. Varjak Paw. Kludge! The family scurried aside as the colossal dog leaped back through the window. Tam turned to Holly, her eyes wide open with wonder. I don't believe it, she whispered. He actually talked to a dog. A real, proper dog. He's called Kludge, said Holly. He's a friend. Kludge's tail wagged merrily. That cloudy look was completely gone from his eyes. They were the clearest black now, and they sparkled with a new life. Man gone now, he panted. Won't come back. Varjak grinned. You saved us all, Kludge, but how did you climb the wall? Kludge drew himself up to his full height. Walls scare Kludge, but friends need Kludge, he shrugged. So Kludge climbed wall. More cheers were going up. Some of the cats from the cage had found the gentleman's caviar. They were feasting like they'd never feasted before. Others were streaming through the shattered green window, returning to their lives outside, as the sun began to rise over the long, dark night. Varjak turned to his family. That's where I'm going, he said. That's where I belong. But you and your friends, you saved us, said Julius. You're head of the family. You can't go now. Varjak smiled at his brother. I think maybe it's time there wasn't a head of the family anymore, he said. There must be a better way of doing things. Show us, Varjak, said Jasmine. I'll show you how to hunt, to fight, to live outside, if you come with me. He looked around the family circle. One by one, they all looked down. But he didn't feel alone. He felt free. Varjak, thank you for saving us, said Father. You were right about the gentleman. We were wrong about your friends. We were wrong about a lot of things. But we can't come outside with you. Not yet, anyway. If you ever need us, said Mother, we'll be here. I understand, said Varjak. And at that moment, for perhaps the first time in his life, he really did. They said their farewells, and then Varjak turned to Holly and Tam. So do you want to be in a gang then? He said. Tam nodded and grinned. There's only one gang I want to be in, said Holly, and that's ours. Kludge too, barked the big dog. Kludge carried them out. As they went, the friends talked and laughed together about the things they had done and the things they would do. Many of the cats they'd freed from the cage followed them, like they were leaders of a gang. So much lay ahead of them. Anything was possible now. It was a beautiful morning. The earth was decked out in dewdrops. The open air was fresh and clean, and up in the clear blue sky, the sun was rising with the promise of a new day, dawning on the wide world, shining bright and amber like the eyes of Varjak Paw.